It was a quiet afternoon at a nursing home on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the building. Inside, an elderly woman, frail but with a spark of life in her eyes, lay in her bed, surrounded by photographs and mementos of a life well lived. Her name was Evelyn, and she was a huge fan of Clint Eastwood. She had followed his career for decades, from his early days as the tough cowboy in Rawhide to his incredible success as a director. Evelyn had always admired Clint's strength, but it was something more than that. His kindness, his integrity, the way he carried himself. Clint had always been her hero, but as time passed, Evelyn's health declined. The doctors had said there wasn't much time left. She knew it, and so did her family. But what Evelyn didn't know was that Clint Eastwood himself would walk through that door one fateful afternoon. It all started when Clint heard about Evelyn's story. A friend of his had told him about this woman, how she had always dreamed of meeting him, how she had followed his career from the very beginning. The story tugged at Clint's heart. He wasn't one to seek attention, but something about this woman's unwavering admiration for him moved him deeply. Clint knew he had to do something. So, on that afternoon, Clint quietly entered the nursing home, not wanting to make a big scene. He was just a man visiting someone who had admired him for years. Evelyn, unaware of his presence, was lying in her bed, her breath shallow but steady. The staff had prepared her for a visitor, but they didn't expect someone of Clint's stature. But there he was, standing at the foot of her bed, quietly watching her. Clint stood there for a moment, watching Evelyn. Her face was lined with age, but there was a peacefulness about her. It was clear that this woman had lived a full life, and yet there was a sense of longing in her eyes. She had waited for this moment for so long, a moment she wasn't sure would ever come. Evelyn's family had mentioned to the staff that she had been a huge fan of Clint for years, and her greatest wish was to meet him. The nurses had told Clint how Evelyn had talked about him just days before her condition worsened. She had said, "One day I want to see Clint before I go." Clint was touched, and he knew that this moment was something special. He quietly approached her bedside, not wanting to disturb her too much. But as he neared, Evelyn opened her eyes, and when she saw him, her face lit up with recognition. For a split second, she thought she was dreaming. "Clint?" she whispered, her voice weak but filled with disbelief. Clint smiled gently, his heart softening at the sight of this woman who had admired him for so long. "Yes, it's me," he replied quietly, sitting beside her bed. Evelyn's eyes began to tear up, and for a moment there was an awkward silence. She didn't know what to say. Words felt so small in the face of the moment they were sharing. Clint broke the silence with a simple, heartfelt gesture. He took her hand in his, the touch warm and reassuring. "I've heard so much about you, Evelyn. It's an honor to meet you," he said softly. Evelyn's lips trembled as she squeezed his hand. "I never thought I'd meet you," she whispered, the emotion in her voice overwhelming. Clint leaned in, closer, his voice gentle. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." As the minutes passed, Clint remained by Evelyn's side, their conversation flowing quietly between them. Evelyn spoke of her life, her love for the movies, and how Clint's films had always given her strength through the difficult times. Clint listened intently, his respect for this woman growing with every word. It wasn't just her admiration for him that moved him, it was the way she spoke about life, the way she cherished every moment. Clint knew this moment was far more significant than any film or award he had ever received. This was real. As Evelyn spoke, her voice became weaker, and Clint could see the toll her illness was taking. Her breaths grew more shallow, and yet her eyes still shone with that same spark that had drawn him to her in the first place. Clint, ever the composed man, felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't sure how to express what he was feeling. Words seemed too small. The room, once filled with the sound of life, now felt still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. In a soft voice, Evelyn said, "Clint, you've made my life so much brighter. Thank you for all the years of inspiration. I've never wanted anything more than this." Clint's heart ached. He gently wiped a tear from his eye, but his expression remained calm. "Evelyn, I'm just doing what I love. But meeting you today, that's a gift I'll carry with me." The room was quiet for a moment, the air thick with emotion. Clint leaned closer to Evelyn, wrapping his arms around her in a warm, tight hug. It wasn't just a hug. It was a gesture of gratitude, of connection, of understanding. For a brief moment, everything else in the world faded away. It was just Clint and Evelyn, two souls meeting at the intersection of life and death, sharing one final tender embrace. As Clint held Evelyn in his arms, he could feel the weight of the moment. Time seemed to stand still as the world outside the nursing home continued to spin, but in that room, nothing else mattered. Evelyn had always been a fighter, strong, resilient, and full of life. But now, she was ready to let go. Her breath grew weaker, but there was a peacefulness in her face that Clint had never seen before. For the first time in a long while, she looked content. Clint pulled back slightly, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice low and steady, "you've made a difference. Your life, your story, it's something special." Evelyn's eyes flickered with a faint smile as if she understood everything Clint was saying. She squeezed his hand one last time, her grip faint but filled with emotion. "Thank you, Clint," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but Clint heard it clear as day. It was the last thing she would say, and it meant everything. The room grew even quieter, the stillness almost sacred. Clint remained by her side, not wanting to leave, but knowing that her time had come. Evelyn's breathing became slower, and her eyes fluttered closed. Clint stayed with her, watching her peaceful face. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for having shared this moment with her. As the minutes passed, the nurses quietly entered the room, having seen what had transpired. They knew what was happening, but they gave Clint the space to say his final goodbye. And then, as the soft hum of the world outside the room faded, Evelyn took her last breath, slipping away in the warmth of Clint's embrace. The room was still. Clint sat quietly, his hand resting gently on Evelyn's. He didn't want to leave. In that moment, he felt a deep sense of connection, not just to Evelyn, but to everyone who had ever found meaning in his work. As the nurses quietly took over, Clint stood, his heart heavy but filled with a sense of peace. He had been part of something greater than himself. As he walked out of the room, the weight of the experience lingered. It wasn't just the passing of a fan. It was the passing of someone who had lived a life, who had loved, who had been inspired by the stories Clint had helped tell. It was a reminder that the impact we have on others isn't always measured by fame or accolades, but by the simple, quiet moments of connection. Clint stepped outside into the late afternoon sun. The weight of the world hadn't lifted, but something had shifted inside him. He had done something that mattered, something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. A few days later, a small obituary for Evelyn appeared in the local paper. It wasn't filled with grand achievements or public accolades, but instead, it spoke of a woman who had lived with grace and who had found inspiration in the world around her. The last line read, "Evelyn's greatest wish was to meet Clint Eastwood, and in her final moments she did." Clint read it, a lump forming in his throat. The world would continue on, but for Clint, this was a moment he would carry forever. It was more than just a fan's wish. It was a reminder of the power of connection, of how small moments could change everything. Please subscribe to the channel for Clint Eastwood's respect. Thanks.